You won't believe how Hollywood's most trusted leading man ended up forgotten, alone, and quietly asking his son to help him stay alive. Glenn Ford. If you know the name, you probably remember the quiet strength, the steady stare, and the calm voice that made him the box office king of 1958. He starred in over 100 films, played opposite icons like Marlon Brando and Rita Hayworth, and for decades was a face audiences trusted. But behind that polished image was a man who spent most of his life running, from love, from fatherhood, and sometimes from himself. He loved one woman deeply, but never married her. He had one son, but abandoned him for nearly half a century. And when his health failed, it wasn't a studio exec or an old flame who showed up. It was that same son, returning not for revenge, but for answers. And what he found was heartbreaking. Let's go back. Glenn Ford was born in 1916 in a tiny Canadian town with the very un-Hollywood name Gwilyn Samuel Newton Ford. His father was related to Canada's first Prime Minister. His mother's family descended from a US president. He came from status, but not from comfort. When Glenn was 8, his family moved to Santa Monica, California, and that's where he fell in love with the stage. School plays lit something up in him. Not just a love for acting, but maybe a way to live through someone else's story. Because he didn't know how to tell his own. After high school, he struggled. He didn't have money, but he had work ethic. Glenn worked as an electrician, carpenter, and handyman while auditioning for movie roles. He failed a lot. Fox turned him down. So did Universal. Directors mocked him, but he kept showing up. In 1939, Columbia Pictures took a gamble, signing him and another unknown actor named William Holden. One exec famously said, "One of them will make it, the other will be eaten alive." Turned out, both made it. Big time. But success didn't come easy. His early films were forgettable. Then, in 1946, everything changed. Gilda. Glenn played opposite Rita Hayworth, and their chemistry didn't just light up the screen. It lit something real. They weren't just acting. For the next 40 years, they were tangled in a love story that never quite happened, but never really ended either. They never married. They were never official. But they built homes next to each other, shared breakfasts, sunbathed like a couple that didn't need a label. Glenn once said, "I never saw Gilda as a movie. It was a memory." Rita wasn't the only woman in his life, though. Glenn married dancer and actress Eleanor Powell in 1943. She was dazzling on stage, a true MGM star. But when she married Glenn, she gave it all up. The spotlight, the applause, everything. To become his wife and the mother of their only child, Peter. She hoped for a happy ending. What she got was silence. Glenn had affairs, lots of them. He recorded phone calls with over 140 women, including names like Marilyn Monroe and Judy Garland. But what hurt more than the cheating was the emotional distance. Peter, their son, later said, "My father didn't hug me. He didn't talk to my mother. He just appeared when he had to, then disappeared." They lived in a giant mansion, but in separate worlds. Eleanor upstairs, Glenn downstairs, Peter caught in between. And when Peter turned 14, Eleanor finally filed for divorce. Glenn didn't argue. She walked away with her son, and Glenn just kept going. Now here's the twist. Glenn Ford played devoted fathers on screen. In Blackboard Jungle, he was the teacher who believed in his students. In Superman, he played Clark Kent's adoptive dad, the moral anchor. But in real life, Peter says, he loved women, he loved work, but he didn't know how to be a father. For years, they barely spoke. No birthday calls, no advice. Glenn sent a check every month, but that was it. Just enough to avoid looking like a deadbeat, but never enough to be a dad. And yet somewhere deep down, Glenn wanted to be more than just a movie hero. During World War II, he shocked Hollywood by joining the Marine Corps Reserve. He could have stayed behind and entertained troops like many stars did. Instead, he signed up. But soon after, a serious stomach condition hospitalized him and ended his deployment hopes. He never talked about it, but you could tell it hurt. He later served in the Naval Reserve and was even awarded France's Legion of Honor, not for combat, but for helping refugees and raising money during the war. Not with bullets, but with integrity. As the 1960s faded into the 70s, Glenn shifted from movies to TV. He had solid roles, but the golden age was over. He made one final mark in 1978 as Jonathan Kent in Superman. Just a few lines, one quiet scene, but it left an impact. Because when Glenn looked into that camera, he didn't act. He simply was, steady, human, real. But behind closed doors, the real story kept unfolding. Rita Hayworth, his great love, began to lose her memory in the early 80s. Alzheimer's. She forgot everything, except it seemed Glenn. He stayed with her until the end, quietly, without cameras. When she passed in 1987, Glenn was one of the pallbearers. No speech, no drama, just love, quiet and true. Then came the final chapter. After a series of strokes, Glenn could no longer walk. His memory faltered. He hired a young nurse named Pauline to care for him. And at some point, she became more than just his caregiver. Glenn rewrote his will, leaving her most of his estate. Family was cut out. But what triggered alarm bells was when Peter discovered that Pauline had placed a do not resuscitate order, without Glenn's consent. So Peter stepped in. He didn't fight over money. He fought to keep his father alive. In court, the DNR was revoked. Pauline was removed. And suddenly, Glenn, who had once been so distant, asked Peter to move in. It was almost too late, but not quite. For the first time, father and son shared stories. Glenn began to talk. Peter listened. And through these fragile final moments, they found something they never had before. Understanding. Glenn passed away in 2006. No headlines. No red carpet tributes. Just a quiet death at home. Ashes buried with his loyal dog, Bismar. Hollywood moved on fast. No big memorials. No retrospectives. His name faded. And maybe that's the tragedy. He was never the loudest, flashiest star. But that's exactly why audiences loved him. Glenn Ford was the quiet hero, the steady hand, the guy you believed in. Not because he shouted, but because he showed up on screen like someone you knew, someone real. So if you've ever watched Gilda, or The Big Heat, or Blackboard Jungle, and felt something stir, you've already touched Glenn Ford's legacy. Not a legacy of fame or fortune, but of quiet strength, of imperfection, of a man who, in the end, just wanted to be understood. And maybe that's what matters most. If this story moved you, even a little, don't let it fade like Glenn's name almost did. Leave a comment, share your favorite film, or just say, I remember him. Because sometimes, the most unforgettable legends are the ones who never ask to be remembered.